republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very much. We are looking at the approval of our regular agenda. I would entertain motions here.
Also move.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Very good. All those in favor of approving the regular agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And entertain a motion on the consent agenda, please.
Approve the consent agenda.
And a second.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Gentlemen, let's move right into real business here. City Engineer Brad Reesick, the consideration of resolution number 2019-06. We have revised the, with discussion from the council previously, and Brad has gone ahead and put this into the record here with the resolution 2019-06, simplifying our special assessment policy for road improvements. Brad, can you take it from here, please?
Sure, Mayor. Thank you very much. Mayor and members of the council, of course, this is a continuation of our discussion at last month's council meeting, and with your feedback, we revised the special assessment policy with the following additions to what we had proposed last month. The first one is this, the city encourages all neighborhoods within the feasibility study to participate in the project to benefit from the economy of scales of a much larger competitively bid construction project. I think that just is common sense for everybody. The other thing that we modified was the initial or the original assessment policy asked that we have 75% of the proposed units approve the project. We've modified that to 50%. The other thing that we talked about last month was putting a term year limit on the feasibility report. We talked about 3 years, and so we added that language. And then we also, as part of that, we added language that if residents come after that 3-year period, that they would be responsible for the cost of a new feasibility report. So I guess with that said, I would entertain any questions from the council.
Well, Brad, what I'd like you to do, just real quick, I just very quickly want you to set the table, and I want to ask you just a couple of questions to do that. What's been your experience holding neighborhood meetings, and you've held a number of neighborhood meetings over the last, about year and a half or so, is that correct?
That's correct.
And with the feasibility study costs that were included with those at that time, the council had previously changed that policy so that feasibility costs became the responsibility of the petitioning homeowners, as you remember.
Correct.
Now, was that holding up the process for you? Can you explain why you sort of championed this change? Talk to us about that.
So it was really holding up the process. The residents were really, it was their responsibility to champion the project. And from that standpoint, the resident that was championing the project typically felt responsible for paying for that feasibility report, or trying to solicit their neighbors for sharing that responsibility. And so it made it real difficult for the residents to figure out how they would go about doing that. And so I think by, putting the language in so that the city would be responsible for the feasibility report costs, it would take the onus off the residents of trying to figure out how to pay, how to divvy up, I guess, the cost of that feasibility report.
Gotcha. So you've been the point man on this. You've been holding the meetings. You've been the guy the residents are seeing. What is your feeling about changing this down to 35% paying for this feasibility study? Do you feel like some of the neighborhood meetings that you have had thus far and some of the projects that you've studied and been involved with thus far that didn't go forward, do you feel we have a much better chance to get those projects moving forward now?
I do.
You do?
I
Okay,
do.
great. On D, just basic philosophy. The one addition to the basic philosophy obviously was already there. What's been added here is D, the city encourages all neighborhoods within the feasibility study to participate in the project to benefit from the economy of scale of a much larger competitively bid construction project. And, you know, I realize you don't have a project in front of you to look at the numbers right now. But what are we talking? If we're doing from a quarter mile, all of a sudden we're doing a mile project with full participation from our neighbors, what type of savings do you think we could affect there? If, say, the road surfaces were all, in a perfect world, the road surfaces were all in the same condition, we'd be doing the same type of project. Is it a 10% savings, a 15% savings?
I would say 10 to 15% savings.
10 to 15%
of a larger,
savings.
you know, $1 million project that we could.
So we're going to save $100,000 to $150,000 on $1 million project.
Sure.
If we can wrap more of that together, get up to a mile or so.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. So that, and from my perspective, then we'll take questions here just real quick. From my perspective, we've done 3 projects over the last, how many years? 10? 12 years? Yeah, we've done about 3 projects in the last 12 years.
We've done 2 in the last 2 years.
Yeah, we have, because of your involvement and Ms. Point's involvement in pushing these projects, and some of the homeowners who have been instrumental in getting that done, like Mr. Tufty and Mr. Helander back here.
Right.
Okay, that's why some of those things have been done. Not because our road policy was amenable to our residents getting this done on their own or being their own champion to move this forward. It was because of the professionals, it was because of guys like that. So at this point, we have to start moving this process forward from my perspective, because we are going to get more and more and more expensive if we don't start moving forward. And we've got to get it done. And just one final question for you. Do you have on the tip of your tongue, what's the state law regarding assessment? So if the city assesses a house, how is that considered a fair, a property? How is that considered a fair assessment if, what happens, the value rises, or do you remember how it works?
Typically, some communities would go through the extent of doing appraisal of the value of the home. There's a value that it cannot exceed a certain threshold. I guess I don't know what that is right off the top of my tongue. But I could certainly find that information out and bring it to the
Not
next
necessary.
meeting.
My point is more general in the sense that the assessments that this council will order, I think this council is of good faith and wants to make sure that these assessments are adding to the value of our neighborhoods and to individual property
So
owners.
I can say that, the typical assessments have been between $7,500 and $8,500 for the projects that we've done in the last couple of years.
Okay.
And so most of the property values, I would say, in those neighborhoods, I don't know, exactly what they would be, but I'm guessing between $400,000 and $500,000 properties. And so that amount, I would think, would be within
Mine
that
went up-
range of.
I'll stop you there. Mine went up $30,000 in a year. So obviously, with a new road, that would even be better. Gentlemen, other questions on this policy? Other questions of Brad? Tom, Denny,
Not me.
Jeff, John? Questions? Go ahead. Fire.
Okay. In general, the feasibility study, this has been bounced around over the years. It's been back and forth. First, the city paid for them. Then they stopped paying for them because they weren't getting done. So then we decided, we'll pay for them. Then we decided we weren't paying for them. So this has been going back and forth a lot. So I'm fine with the fact that the city pays for it, because we're trying to get this going forward. I don't have a problem with that. The 35% threshold for the feasibility study, that's not changing. That's always been 35.
Yeah, that's in state statute. That's state statute.
Yeah, so that's always, so I thought there was some comment maybe that was changed, but that wasn't. That was always been 35. Okay, then we had some comments at the meeting last time about having a 50% threshold. I agree with the mayor. I think, the staff has done a great job having the meetings, pushing this forward. I think the city and the council also has done great things by, adding some costs for pothole patching and other things to the kitty, as it were, to try to keep the costs down. So I think the council's been doing a good job with that. But also, as we've sat up here, I've heard a lot of people say, you're in control of your own roads, you're doing this, but if we get down to 50% as the threshold, 2 things come to my mind. The reason it was 75 is because we want a reasonable amount of people on the project that want to be part of the project, so we don't go through the trouble of having assessments and roles and meetings and staff time, and then we find out we only have 50%. Are we really gonna go forward with 50% of the people on a road who wanna get the project done? Are we gonna just assess the other people even though they didn't wanna pay for it? I mean, we can, but that's kind of what we used to say we were against. So I'm kind of curious why we would all of a sudden be for something like that, because it seems like, why have the policy then? So that's the feeling about that I get. So I don't think 50% is the threshold we should be at. I know when we did a couple of them, we were real close to 75, and we had the wiggle room, and I think that's fine for the council to have a little wiggle room. But I said this at the last meeting, and I'll say it again, I think 50%, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
And I'm not done.
Yep,
And,
go ahead.
and so I think if we go forward also with that, and we start going forward, assessments on redoing somebody's roads are different than paving a gravel road. That's a definite improvement. It can be, it can be a hard thing to prove based on appraisals or whatever. And I would hate to see the city get in a situation where we're going forward with a project, having assessments and getting a challenge and having some kind of an issue with that. I think we're stronger if 3 or 4 or 5 people object and go to court and try to not pay the assessment than 20. And that could be an issue for us. I would rather not do it that way. I would rather have a higher threshold. That's my opinion. Obviously, the council will vote and decide what we're gonna do, so I'm done.
Okay, just real quick, the 50%, as you well know, Tom, most cities around us don't have petitions, they don't have meetings, they don't involve the citizens, they rank their roads. And when you're gonna get your road done in Montemita, the first thing you basically know about it is a letter shows up in your box and says, guess what? Hey, congratulations, you're getting a new road, and you're going to be assessed for it. If we look all the way down under the procedures page here on D, all the way down at the bottom, the city council reserves the right to approve or disapprove of any project in accordance with the best interests of the citizens of the city of Grant. That's always been there, okay? We can order these projects. That is within our power to order these projects. The 50%, for me, from my perspective, because Brad can't really answer what Tom was saying here. Tom's addressing the council and fairly. He's got a concern about this 50%, that there could be some blowback on it, there could be some problems with it. This policy and set of procedures still keeps the majority of the citizens on a road in that process. We keep them in that process in an advise and consent role to tell us what they really want. Now, that's important because we can do this without that advise and consent. It's within our power. I don't want to. I would prefer not to be Montemita or one of these other cities because Tom's right. We've never wanted to be that. I've never wanted that to be that way. But we have got to start moving forward on these. And I think that the residents at some point need to say, hey, I voted for these guys. They need to make some good decisions. They need to get these road projects moving forward, especially on the roads that are, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we ever seen a petition that was on a road that was rated over like a 7 or 8 on a rating scale? I mean, we're seeing these at 5 and 6, aren't we?
Right.
I mean, we're seeing these beat up. You look at Joliet, you look at some of these other roads, it's plain common sense. You don't need an engineer to go out and look at Joliet and know what needs to be done. It's just that simple. You just look at it. I mean, my wife tells me all the time how much she looks at it. I get yelled at on that. So, at some point, the keeping the 50% threshold there. I want citizen input. I want these people telling me what they want. I want the petition by 35% to get the feasibility study. I think it's correct that the city pay for it. That we have a deadline on that. Do I wish it could be 75%? Yes, but as I said, 3 projects in 10, 12 years, we're not keeping up. We're not keeping up, and what we're doing is we're creating ourselves a fiscal cliff. We're gonna come up this big hill, and then all of a sudden there's gonna be all these roads at just horrid ratings, and we're gonna have to do something. And some of our neighboring cities are actually reached their bonding limit. I don't know if you know that, but some of our neighboring cities can't borrow any more money because they've reached that type of a hill, and then they had to borrow a bunch of money. No, there's no more money to borrow. They're at their limit. We've got to start this process. So that's my answer to that. Denny, I'm sorry I took all your time. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. No, I was gonna say that I supported the majority going to 51% last time for 2 reasons. I get concerned because this happened to a neighbor road just south of us. You have a small number of citizens. I think there's 6 on there. So there was no majority if it was an even split. Half of them wanted to do it. 2 of them were gonna sell, didn't want to do anything. There was a large parcel or long stretch on someone besides, and they voted it down, even though most of the people still wanted to do it. I get concerned that that doesn't happen there. The other concern is with 3 projects in 10 years, we have X, how many citizens continue to wish they had better roads, and yet nothing ever gets done. If you don't start some of this, to your point, Mr. Mayor, you're gonna reach a point where now it's not a $7,000 or $8,000 hit per unit, it's a $15,000 or $18,000 hit per. I think you gotta start somewhere.
Tom, did you have your hand up again?
Do you wanna?
Tom?
Yeah, I do,
ahead.
actually. Yeah, because I've heard that ever since I sat up here from everybody, and the reason we haven't had and hadn't done any reconstruction roads is the roads are kind of getting to their critical time, and so now they're starting to happen. They didn't happen 10 years ago because they didn't need to happen.
Agreed.
So, and there are some roads, and people, you know, and it's a long story. The roads are, yeah. Let's not start because we're not going to end until.
It's a huge
So
subject.
it's a huge project, but I don't like to hear we're falling off the fiscal cliff because we're not. It's a road, and we'll survive, and it'll be just fine.
Right.
So we're not going anywhere, and there's no urgency necessarily to do it. I think what is happening with the staff's good work with this, the council acting like, you know, hey, let's chip in some stuff, let's give some incentives. Excuse me, let's start our 7-year seal coat plan. Let's throw that money in the kitty. Let's do all that. Those are things that never happened before. And they weren't in place 10 years ago. So now that we have all that in place and everybody kind of gets it, that's helping move this along. So I just think if you're going to go to 50%, then why even have a number? That's my opinion. Because I think then the residents really just are really, yeah, we could have a meeting, but to say that they're involved in their input, yeah, they're there. Their input, but if we're gonna assess half the people that don't want it anyway, then why not just do it? And to make another point, in a couple of years with the census, if we get to 5,000 people, we'll be having a different conversation up at this table because we'll have money to spend. And that'll be a whole different conversation. And things will change. So that's my only comment.
Well, let me clarify real quick. I didn't say we were at a fiscal cliff. I said if we wait too much longer, we could get to one. You're right, we would have a very different conversation with 5,000 residents. We'd get approximately $250,000 a year. And this road policy at that point, we would obviously need to come up here and do some hard work and look at how we were gonna start contributing to roads in addition to those seal coating and patching funds that we're doing. So that would be a very different and a very nice and fun conversation to have. I very much look forward to that. So, Mr. Giefer, you were next.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with your comments, you know, about the fiscal responsibility. At the League of Minnesota conference training that I attended recently as being a newly elected city official, one of the things that they stressed the most is the importance to be fiscally responsible and be ahead of, you know, your projects like this. I think Denny said it best, like, if there's a $500,000 project now, you wait too much longer, and it could be, you know, a $700,000-$800,000 project. So they had a lot of examples where cities actually got in pretty serious debt because they kicked the can down the road. They tried to be too lean with their taxes and their assessments, and they ended up, you know, some of them ended up going bankrupt. So I think, although we're not at a fiscal cliff yet, we need to have that flexibility to make the decisions without simply put in the, you know, 70 or whatever, 75% of the citizens. I think we need to retain that flexibility to do what's fiscally responsible for the city.
Okay, so, thank you, Jeff. Well put. Denny, did you have something to add to this? And then let's get it wrapped up unless John has, you have some comments?
Is it appropriate to just ask another councilman, what percentage would you go to? Now, what do you like?
Well, I like the wiggle room. Oh, God, excuse me, can I talk, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, of course.
I've taken over? No, I'm just kidding. I don't know, I just think 75, yeah, I agree with the mayor. I think 75 has been proven. We want a little more flexibility than that. You know, maybe we go to 70. I brought up 65 last meeting, but we go to 65 or 70. I understand your points on trying to get them paved, but at the same, I think we've been big about citizens' rights and the fact that we have this road policy, and we are different because we haven't had any gas tax money. So I just think, we're mixing those two together, and I think we're starting to pull away from one and leaving the other one at the curb, as it were. So I would think 70, 65, something like that, to make it more realistic, but keep the language in there, 65-ish. You know, so if it's 63, 62, 61, and as the mayor said at the end there, we have the right to do it anyway if we really want to. But I think at least we should show the residents we're really trying to get your participation in this, instead of saying it's 50%, because I don't think that shows that. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Danny, go ahead.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, though, Mr. Mayor. The council still has the ability to not push anything like this on. If you're looking for wiggle room and you want to have some ambiguity in there, you have that.
It's already there.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's already
You can
there.
already do that.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean you're going to.
Yeah.
I don't want to force things on.
This
residents either.
is,
It's not our
the reason that, and let me interrupt you here, the reason that I agree with the 50% is not that I want to remove the residents from it and approve any and all of these. I want the flexibility without having to go to D, the city council reserves the right to approve or disapprove of any project. I don't want to have to do that. I want to be able to say, look, we've got 50%. Are we on some of these roads going to get more than that? Yep. And I'm going to be real happy about doing that. But having that flexibility, I think, is important, and I don't think we're leaving anything by the wayside. What we're being is fiscally responsible, looking down the path, because what we're doing, just I can't say how you can say that's working when we've done 3 roads in 10, 12 years, even though the first 2 came up. Hang on, John, did you have something to input here?
I did. I think Denny makes a good point. Tom makes a good point. When I was reading this, I thought, 50%, that's a very, it's a number. And as Denny had said, you got 6 people. What do you do, 3 and 3? So if you change that from 50% to say just a majority, that's your wiggle room, So, if you said just a majority, it doesn't mean that it has to be 50% now. It could be anything. So Denny's point, 4 out of 6. So now you're 66% right there.
Yeah.
So, instead of 3 and 3.
Yeah, and I want to make very clear, and I don't say this in a manner that I don't say this in any manner. I'm just going to be very clear. We have the power to order these. We do. This entire road procedure here can be put away, and we can just institute a ranking system. When it gets to a certain rank, we'll order it. We're trying to keep everyone involved. We're trying to keep it balanced. We're trying to keep residents talking to us and telling us what they want. That's the point of this. And we're going to get higher than that. So, you know what, let's Tom, go ahead, and then let's start moving forward here.
What I mention is, I think, again, through the staff work and the council work, if we've done 3 overlay kind of reconstructs, not pave, like we've done on a lot of residents, that's 300% more than we've done in the last 30 years before that. So that's pretty good.
Yep.
It's not bad.
Nope.
So it is working. So it's just a matter of, we have to set it up so that it keeps working. And I appreciate everybody's efforts
Yeah.
on that.
No, and I'll just reiterate, the reason that those are working as well as they were, Tom, and I think you and I could have a good conversation about this and lasting a long time. A lot of the reasons that happened was not I'm just going to be real honest here, the pittance we were putting in terms of the ceiling money and the pothole money. It was the professional staff, how good they are, and a couple of guys in that back row who are real good at what they do too. So I just, it's my perspective that we need to change this and move forward with it. And if all of these efforts that you and others are putting toward the census pay off, we get to that 5,000, please, and we've got that $250,000, we're going to have a real happy time up here putting that money to very good use very, very quickly. So if there are no other substantial comments here, I guess I would look forward or look to motions with friendly amendments or what have you, gentlemen.
I make a motion to approve as written.
And we have JG.
I would second that.
All right. All those in favor of approving resolution number 2019-06 as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Do we have any nays?
Nay.
All right. Very good, gentlemen. Thank you. Into the books. Hopefully we can come back to that when we get those tax dollars from our newly updated census. What a wonderful conversation that would be to have. We're going to pivot right to, thank you, Brad, by the way, City Planner Jennifer Haskamp. Go ahead.
All right.
Small cell wireless.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Before you this evening, we have a draft ordinance related to small cell wireless facilities. And I thought I would take just a few moments to kind of give you a little bit of background as to how this came before you, and then also what we need to do tonight, and then walk through just a couple of pieces of the ordinance. If at any time you have questions, please feel free to ask them. We don't have to hold them till the end because I know this is a 9-page ordinance, so sometimes holding it till the end is not the best idea. So from a procedural perspective, for those of you that were on the council in late 2017, the city enacted a right-of-way ordinance. And up until that time, the city did not actually have a right-of-way ordinance. We had a placeholder within the ordinance section, chapter 28, but we did not actually have any standards with respect to what could be placed in a right-of-way, who could be in the right-of-way, and how that process would go. The impetus for creating that ordinance was actually the same thing. It had to do with the small cell wireless facilities. At the time, I'm sure you all remember, we had the Super Bowl that was coming to town, and these small cell wireless facilities were popping up all over the place, and cities were like, wait a minute, how do we regulate this? So that was sort of the driver behind why the right-of-way ordinance got put into play in the first place. However, the specific statutory guidelines, if you will, did not exist at that time with respect to the small cell wireless facilities because the technology was so new. So as a result, cities were in a little bit of flux from the standpoint of those cities that actually had right-of-way ordinances were figuring out how to permit them, how to go through that process, what to charge, what fees to charge, et cetera. Meanwhile, the small cell wireless facilities were saying, wait a minute, we should have the same kinds of rights as other utilities do in the right-of-way. And so obviously thus created a bit of friction between municipalities and these providers because the providers at the time did not have the status, if you will, with the Public Utility Commission to be able to just go in and use the right-of-way. So it had to sort of work its way out and work its way through the courts. And so because that happened in 2018, our first step really was in 2017 when we adopted the right-of-way ordinance. So the right-of-way ordinance itself is pretty silent on small cell wireless facilities specifically, but it was initially put into play as at least the first start, or the first step to addressing how we might go about permitting the small wireless facilities in the city. I did attend, actually, this was at the last quarter, I believe, of 2017, where I went to a couple of roundtables that were hosted by the League of Minnesota Cities, where they talked and had some of these providers in and talked about how they perceived themselves and the places that they would want to be, one of those being communities like Grant from the standpoint of there are dead spots, the service isn't great, and so particularly along major corridors, et cetera, places like Grant are desirable. So obviously there was a lot of desire in places like downtown Minneapolis, particularly when they were going to have this huge influx of folks coming in for the Super Bowl, but also places like Grant or similar that maybe have a little bit spotty services.
A lot spotty.
So from that perspective, obviously, initially in 2017, it was, okay, hurry up, let's get a right-of-way ordinance in place. We did that. We went through that process. So that is Article 4 of this chapter. What's before you tonight is Article 5. So for those of you who took a look at it, I'm sure you'll notice that there's some references back to Article 4, so that right-of-way ordinance itself is still in play, so this does not supersede it or replace it. Instead, it's in addition to. So over the course of 2018, the wireless facility providers went and argued, and they were before the courts, and the FCC made a ruling. And essentially, at the end of the day, the ruling came out that cities have until April 17th, I believe the date is, to enact an ordinance that regulates these things and regulates them from an aesthetic standpoint. So I use that I chuckle only because if you read the statutory language, it's pretty much like they get to use the right-of-way, is essentially what it comes down to, and that they were granted the authority to be able to do that. However, the city has to have an ordinance in place to regulate them and to be able to go through a permitting process. If that's not enacted by the middle of April, then you kind of lose that ability, is essentially how it's come out. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't going to still be appeals that go through the process, but essentially the League of Minnesota Cities has come out with a recommendation of get something in place. If it goes through the courts, if something else happens, great, you can repeal it or you can adjust it, amend it, et cetera. But at this time, essentially get something in play. So that's the background. That's about as short as I can make it. I think I covered a year and a half of time in about 10 minutes, but that's basically how we got here. So the ordinance tonight is very specific to the small cell wireless facilities. If you read the statutory language that was issued, you'll notice that they are very similar. The draft ordinance that's in front of you tonight is actually something that was primarily, I happened to be sitting in another community where they said, and all of a sudden I found out about these dates and I said, well, we have just enough time to get this in place. So that's how it came about. The League of Minnesota Cities attorneys actually worked on a lot of the language that's in here. It mirrors what's in the statute on purpose, because if you read the statute, it's very clear that most of the things that are in here, you can't do a whole lot about. There's not a lot of flexibility. So from that perspective, it's pretty rigid. There's not a lot of room for flexibility, but there are some places where we want to make sure that they go into place, particularly related to co-location was one of the things that came up. So the statute's pretty clear that you can't tell or regulate the distance between poles or facilities, for example, but if you don't have something in place about co-location, you can't even encourage or require or any of that. So that means every provider could come in and drop their own pole, essentially. So one of the things, at least that when I was listening to it, was you got to make sure that you actually have the co-location language in here. You can't mandate it, but you have to have it. If you don't have it, then you can't even direct it in that direction, from what I understood. So you'll see that that's in here in particular with respect to the co-location. I know that the height is quite high. You'll see it's 50 feet tall. That is what's in the statute, actually, as the maximum. The statute again says that you cannot regulate lower. That is that you have to have 50 feet as your maximum, if you will, unless you happen to have another pole or facility that's actually already been constructed. In this case, I don't think we do. However, nothing would surprise me. They could have dropped one somewhere. If they did, then we could use that and use that as the standard, which is also in here as well in terms of the maximum. But so if you don't have that in, you have to have that language in here as well. The other thing is you don't have to have prescribed what the aesthetic standards or the design standards are, but you have to say that you will regulate for that. And you put that into your ordinance, then the director, or in this case, the city engineer, Brad, gets to decide or help plan what those aesthetic standards look like, and then that's what has to be adhered to as you go through the permitting process. So we can take a look at poles, design standards, et cetera. One of the things that came up in one of the cities that I was sitting in listening to this was related to actually the ground equipment and what that some of it can look like giant refrigerators, basically, in the right-of-way. And so coming up with a set of design or performance standards around those objects, if you will, in order to enforce that and use that through the permitting process. So that is established and identified within this ordinance as well.
Yep. All right. I'm going to give just a tiny bit more background, then have some discussion here. As most of you know, I'm a cable commissioner here and have been for some time. I'm very familiar with the FCC and the history of the FCC guiding and regulating the cable industry and how the right-of-ways were actually handled in the cable industry. As many of you know, the city gets a significant amount of its budget from franchise fees that are brought back into the city through the cable franchise agreement that we signed in conjunction with now 10 other cities. So the cable environment back then was in a different governmental sort of state of play at that point, and they're pretty heavily regulated. We actually, the franchise fees themselves are based upon them being in our right-of-way. They're in our right-of-way, and that's basically what the franchise fees are based upon, is offering them a monopolistic use of the right-of-way in order to get those franchise fees back. Now, this small cell wireless kind of entered commerce here to compete not only with wireless signals for cell phones, they're also going to be offering high-speed data services, so internet. As most of you know, or as many of you might know, only about 50% of Grant. We're 10 miles from St. Paul, and only about 50% of Grant has high-speed internet. That, to me, is scandalous. It's scandalous. The state government has allocated millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to wire up outstate Minnesota. Every little farm in outstate Minnesota has darn near, 5G coverage 24/7 with optical lines running to it because it made sense for the politicians, I'm speaking frankly, made sense for the politicians in St. Paul to do so. Grant has not benefited from those types of state funds in many ways, not only the roads, but in our telecommunications. So this 5G and small cell wireless will offer many more of our residents in Grant the ability to connect with a high-speed connection. But these folks, the companies, the corporations that rolled out this technology, that are now looking to put it into communities like ours, learned from Comcast. And instead of just sort of going willy-nilly and laying lines and getting this done, the first thing they did, and I think Jen might even agree with me, is the first thing they did is they approached government to try to lift some of that unwieldy regulation. As Jennifer said, well, the way you look at the law as it's written, they can kind of put these wherever they want. And I think that's a fair characterization. What we're trying to do here is try to get as much control back over our right-of-way as we can. So we've got two competing things here. We've got really a good for the community in that we're going to get high-speed wireless service, both cell and data, to more of our residents. It's a good thing. But on the other side, we're sort of losing a little bit of control over our right-of-ways as a result of these corporations doing really effective, frankly, really effective lobbying in Washington and in St. Paul prior to rolling out their product. So it's a good thing, but Jennifer, I think, has done a fantastic job writing this, and she's right. It incorporates all the legalese that I think we need to have in here. So with that said, I do have a couple of questions for Mr. Schneider, but let's see if anyone else does. I'll be quiet here for a bit. Tom, Denny, John, Jeff? Jeff? Oh, John, yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
It is first of all, well written. Obviously, you pulled it from someplace, but I did have a couple of questions. In the on page 2, small wireless facility means everything in the sizes. What is a cubit feet? I think it should be cubic. A cubit is an old term that they used to build an ark.
From here to here, John.
Yeah, exactly. That's a cubit.
That's a cubit.
So I think it should be cubic, and there's a couple cubits in there, and then the last one is cubic. So I think all three of those should be cubic, not cubit. And I know that there was a question, I think, that did come up about the fees, and is it a requirement for the League of Minnesota Cities, Jennifer, that we're tied to the Consumer Price Index of Minneapolis-St. Paul area for going forward after 2020, to increase the fees?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so the question of fees is a little bit up for debate. That was one of the pieces that was discussed at length with the FCC ruling and then the outcomes of it. Mm-hmm. One of the pieces that came out of that was this: what is reasonable and what can you reasonably charge in terms of the fees. So what I've seen other communities do at this point is essentially this has been deemed reasonable, therefore that's what's in here. I spoke with Dave a little bit about this particular issue today and said, okay, is this the right way to go about it? At this point, we think it's safe to use this language because that's sort of what's been accepted, if you will, at this exact moment. But it does not mean that we couldn't amend this as more sort of pieces its way out of it. And as different communities start to look at it, I mean, obviously from our perspective, one of the pieces that's different of here versus some other communities is we typically work on an escrow basis. So it might take a lot more for us as a city to process these than a typical city that has, a permitting person on staff, for example. So we talked about how we would go about doing that. There is some language in here that says basically if it's deemed that there's going to be an extensive amount of work and it's above and beyond, I think it's one of the things that ties it to it, even in the statute, is I think it's 15 small cell wireless facilities, that then you can take a look at charging additional fees, review fees. So that piece might have to be readdressed, but at this time, what they came out as being reasonable were the fees that are listed here. So that's why it's drafted this way. Because without doing a fee study, without understanding exactly what it is, there was a lot of discussion about what meant reasonable.
Right.
And at this point, this is what we know kind of passes the mustard, for lack of a better,
Right.
And so how do we derive a different number, and where would we get that from? And I think we would have to do additional study, and that's what Dave and I talked about today.
Okay. All right, yes, and I think from my notes, that was a couple of big ones. It says something else on page 7, the term for the small wireless facility permits shall be for a period for up to 10 years. And so these fees are every year for those 10 years, or is it just to get them going?
So there's
Because I'm just looking at what Mr. Mayor had mentioned about the cable, and it helps the city's budget. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're getting that yearly.
Well, let me just be real, and let me just jump in here. No disparagement of the staff we have here, they're all excellent. But the Cable Commission actually has lawyers who specialize only in telecommunication issues, because this is not actually a law that was drawn up somewhere. This is actually an FCC finding, an FCC order. So this is administrative law that we're trying to administer in a small city using what the LOMC has come forward with. So basically what I said by these corporations being very smart by doing lobbying before they rolled out,
Right.
they're avoiding a lot of what I talked about there. And we're doing our best job that we can with the staff that we have here. And now at some point, if these FCC rulings change, this council or another council in the future may begin to look at perhaps bringing in, just as an occasional consultant, a telecommunication attorney to say, here's what other cities have done, and here's perhaps what you could do, and have some more control back. But at this point, I think Jennifer and Dave and the other staff have done a great job just kind of
Putting it together.
getting in front of this
Right,
problem
right.
is what we've done here. We've got in front of it, and as this FCC ruling and additional orders come out, we can perhaps get even more in front of it, and maybe get some advantages, at that point. So just as a little more background.
The other piece I would add to that is, so on page 8, there's the permit fee, so that's the actual processing of the permit, the initial installation. And then subsection E is the annual fee, or if it's a city-owned or so obviously one of the places that these facilities are being installed are on light fixtures and light poles, and in downtowns, for example, like little small downtowns that have those banner poles and things like that, they fit really nicely on there. So anytime any of that goes in and they put something on it, then these are the fees that come out of it. I agree with the mayor wholeheartedly from the standpoint of, I'm in no way an expert in this, and neither, I don't think Dave is either. And so at some point in time, as this sort of flushes itself out, if it continues to have the traction that it does, it may definitely warrant, having a specialist actually do a fee study, make sure that you know what's going on locally, making sure you're competitive in what your rates are, et cetera. But at this stage of the game, what we do know is this has been deemed reasonable, and if we vary from this, then we should figure out why. You know what I mean? Because we do know that this came out as being reasonable costs, if you will.
All right, thanks, that's all I have.
Thanks, John. Denny?
My only question would be for our city attorney. You've kind of signed off on this as well, or you're comfortable, maybe is a better question.
Yeah, all the comments are correct, and Jennifer did the fundamental work on this, and not only in the future will you have the benefit of some other expertise, I think, but you'll also see this start to evolve through efforts of other cities, and that too will provide additional areas for you to tighten this up, compress it, expand some benefits to the city, including potentially the fees and other things. But right now, it's fair to say that people are just hustling to get some protective ordinance in place. And so that's a bit of what this reflects, although that's not to say that there wasn't original work done, and thanks to Jennifer for that, because it involved some fairly deep review of the administrative background on this.
That's good, thank you both.
Very complex. Tom, anything? You all set, Tom?
Okay.
Dave, quick question for you. I'm reading page 4, I. Any wireless support structure installed in the public right-of-way after May 31, 2017 may not exceed 50 feet above ground level unless the city agrees to a greater height, comma, subject to local zoning regulations and may be subject to separation requirements. However, I want to focus in real quickly on subject to local zoning regulations. As everyone knows up here, we have a hard and fast 35-foot rule on everything that we do here, less communication towers, cell towers that we put in town. So we're 35 feet on all of our structures. Dave, is this going to give us the ability, if they try to put a 50-foot pole, antenna holder, what have you, in a conspicuous area where it's an eyesore, are we going to be able to bring that back down to 35 using this?
I don't think using this, I think the establishment of the aesthetic requirements that the engineer is going to work on will give us some ability. But right now, we looked at this in response to that specific question.
Okay.
And it looks like the statute sort of occupies this area fully, and it says, what can the tower be? Well, it can be whatever it is, but it can't be higher than 50 feet. In other words, the implication is it can be up to 49 feet or 50 feet. And it doesn't appear at this point that we can be below that until we get some aesthetic criteria in place, I think.
Yeah. That's kind of how I read it as well. I'll tell you, we deal a lot with this at the Cable Commission, and like I say, we have dedicated telecommunications lawyers there to try to decipher these kinds of FCC orders. It's pure administrative law. It's not voted on. The FCC gets together, puts their professionals on it, and they just hand this stuff down like black letter law. And it will, I will tell you this from experience, it's going to evolve over the next couple of years because there'll be challenges to it, there'll be back and forth on it, cities are gonna go after it, counties, states are gonna go after it because they're using the right-of-way. They may have lobbied their way into this right now, but they're using the right-of-way of cities that are responsible for maintaining it, keeping the aesthetic, maintaining their own zoning regulations, so this is gonna change. But like Dave said, everyone's scrambling to put up some firewalls and get some control of this problem and get out in front of it. So, Tom.
I just have one question. I thought John actually was going to ask it. Page 5, number 4, what does tolling mean?
I'm sorry, where?
Page 5, number 4.
Okay.
What does tolling mean?
Reset and tolling of the review period?
Tolling means to delay or to stall. So for example, a statute of limitations or a review period can be tolled, which is a way of saying it's frozen, stopped.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, and we need to open a public hearing on this. Okay, real good. Oh, sorry, Mr. Giffer.
Was this intentional?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm
Go ahead.
very offended. No, I'm kidding. My question is kind of adjusted by this previous discussion, and that was going to be, since you said this is kind of mandated, but there was some possibility of flexibility. We haven't really, delved into that, right? I mean, how this is written is basically how it is mandated. There's no things in here that you put in that could be advantageous to us as a city.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so what's, I'm gonna try to answer that as carefully as I can. So the ordinance itself is tailored specifically to you and your Article 4 that exists. So it ties between the two sections. It follows the state statute because or the state rules, excuse me, not the statute, because at this point in time, that's what we have. In terms of how it benefits you or how it's written is that it provides the opportunity to create the aesthetic standards and does not place them within the ordinance. There were a couple of cities that actually started to do that piece of it. As opposed to creating it and then having a director such as your engineer or whomever it is actually enforce it. So it's written from the standpoint of how the city of Grant typically operates, and from a staffing perspective, how we typically operate, which is a little bit different than how some cities who have full staff operate. So I would say that that benefits you from the standpoint of, we want to make sure that it works for you and that it's something that can actually be enforced and monitored and permitted. And if we had just taken it the way that it was, that wouldn't be the
Got it,
case.
got it.
So, but did we write specific things in here that are laced, that are on the gray line between what the FCC and what the rules say? No, we did not do that.
Got it. That's all I had.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, good. Kim, I do so few public hearings. Do we vote on this, or do I just open the public hearing? I always forget.
For the minutes, I would like a motion and a second to open the public hearing.
Real good. I'll entertain a motion in a second for the public hearing opening.
I move to open the public hearing.
And
I'll second.
Very good. All those in favor of opening that public hearing, please signify by saying aye. And anyone here to talk about small cell wireless, consideration of ordinance 2019-59, amendment to chapter 28 to incorporate aesthetic standards for small cell wireless. Slow down, slow down, people. Yeah, slow down.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Please
Wow.
don't trip over each other getting to the
Okay.
mic.
Yeah. Got to put barbed wire up there, keep you away. All right. Up to the microphone, identify yourself and tell us what you're thinking.
Zero General Court. Having erected a few cell towers myself and done some of the after work as far as the buildings and such, a lot of times I think you need to be very specific about the dimensions, more so than the cubic feet of the actual station that coincides with the cell tower, because I think they can, next thing you know, you might end up having a 16 by 16 precast hut stuck on the side of the road because we might have overlooked some numbers. Haven't read the documents myself, but possibly something to look into. Cubic feet, I think, seems like it's something that you give somebody too much wiggle room.
Mr. Albrecht, thank you very much. That's a good point. It doesn't look like anyone else is coming up. I think we're safe. Oh, come on up, sir. Identify yourself, please. Come right up, Jerry.
Okay. Jerry Linzer, I live over here in Joliet, or Jody. I don't know, your conversation previous to this was a little bit more about doing cell phones and all that stuff, or, you know, your first discussion.
Okay.
How many of you know that there are many hundreds of feet and maybe even miles of optic cable laid in our city? Are any of you aware of that?
That we have optic cable laid in the city?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, there's quite a bit of optic cable going through the city.
And do you know
And
that?
pipelines.
Huh?
And pipelines.
No, I'm just talking about
It's
optic
optics,
cable.
okay. Yeah, there's quite a
Because
bit.
that's part of the whole cable
Yeah,
program.
no, I
And
hear you.
telephone.
Yep.
And did you know that none of it is functioning?
No, I am not aware of the functionality.
None of it is functioning.
Yeah.
It was never hooked up. Just where I live on Joliet, there are 3 or 4 access points. And there are some on Joliet as well.
So let me stop you for a moment. What you're telling me right now is Joliet Avenue has optic cable running on the pole, or it's
No,
buried?
it's underground.
It's buried.
It's buried. It's optic
And who
cable.
buried it? Century?
No. The previous, before CenturyLink.
Yeah, the CenturyLink did not bury it.
Was AT&T or
it-
Bell or whoever that was.
That was it, Quest.
Quest,
Yeah.
it was
Quest put it in.
It's a
And I
workshop
think
now.
Quest put it in an attempt to make their bottom line look better to eventual takeover by
Good enough.
some outfit that's
CenturyLink.
CenturyLink.
Gotcha.
In my opinion of CenturyLink is it takes a century to get anything done with them.
So what do you think about the small cell wireless, Jerry?
Well, that we could improve that.
Okay.
We should improve that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they're going to be rolling it out. So.
Well, that's good because where I live, I have a cell phone and I got to drive down the road to use it. It does not work on my property. A little, it works a modicum of, you know, there's other problems there, I think, too. So, can I go back one more step?
As long as it's about small cell wireless, talk.
No, it's not multi-wireless.
That's what the public hearing's for. We'll talk afterward if
Okay,
you'd like to.
okay, yeah.
Okay?
I would like to
Okay. Sounds
have
good.
some comments, make some comments to you folks about your approach to getting this road
Okay.
construction.
Well, let's talk about
Yeah,
that
yeah.
when
Okay.
we are done here, and we'll get
Yeah.
this public hearing done, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Very good. I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion to close this public hearing, since it seems we've exhausted our supply of witnesses here, speakers.
I will so move.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Real good. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Very good. We are closed. Heard some interesting commentary there, Mr. Albrecht first, about the dimensions of the small cell infrastructure. Jennifer, if I read correctly, it seems like that is, to your mind, nailed down pretty well in this, or not?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the small wireless facility definition is pulled from the rules that were provided, so my understanding is if it is outside of that definition, then it trips into our other portion of the ordinance, which would regulate cellular towers, et cetera. So it's making a clear break between what the two things are. I'm not an expert in this. I just play one on TV at the moment. And so what I would say about this is that this must, when I read this definition and what's provided by the rules and how it's described within the FCC rulings, et cetera, is that this is obviously industry standard in terms of how they're measuring it. So if you read the definition, so I couldn't offer some other definition that would be more prescriptive because this is what's been provided.
Simply put, the FCC order came down, and again, it's administrative law. We don't have a chance to change it. There is no opportunity for us to administratively here at this table change what came down to us from the FCC. So we're stuck there. But again, these orders evolve, things change, and we need to stay on top of that, as I'm sure Jennifer is planning to do, as well as Dave. And as those things change, again, your city will be on top of it. The other comment we got, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that one, other than I'm going to be checking into that. That's interesting. On the optical cable in the city that's non-functional. That's interesting. We'll check in on that. Did I see a resolution for this, Kim, or how are we handling this?
Mr. Mayor and council members, it is consideration of ordinance number 2019-59, which was included in your packets.
It says draft.
The draft, yeah, it's like this front cover of the draft.
I don't have it, but I will go ahead and,
Mr. Mayor, there's a summary publication related to this by resolution that's further on in the agenda.
and that's a new business, right?
Correct.
Okay.
This is the actual ordinance language, which is 2019-59.
Right, but we still need a motion and a second and a vote on this one, and then we can vote on the summary publication. So, entertaining a motion and a second on this 2019-59.
I make a motion to approve ordinance 2019-59 as written.
Okay. And a second.
With modifications that we made for cubic versus cubic and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, with the spelling, with the
Right.
spelling.
The spelling, yeah.
Okay. And do we have a second? Was that your second, John? With the
Second.
friendly amendment?
Second.
I thought he seconded.
Okay, with the friendly amendment, real good. All those in favor of approving 2019-59 as stated, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Very good. We're going to move forward here. Dave Schneider has no action items. We'll jump right into new business. Consideration of Resolution 2019-08, the resolution requesting comprehensive road and transit funding. As people who have been up on this table for a couple of years probably remember quite well, we've been passing these for years. This is, if I'm not mistaken, put together by the League of Minnesota Cities on our behalf, as they are a lobbyists for us, if you will. They represent small cities. Of course, we are one. So they put together these resolutions, forward them to the legislature. Kim, do you want to take this over?
Mr. Mayor and council members, I think you just explained it. The league is just urging city councils to adopt this resolution, calling for the legislation to pass and continue with the dedicated funding for state and local roads, which I believe you've received for the last couple of years now. The small cities assistance
Small cities assistance.
that you put towards your special roads projects.
Yeah, if just to have a quick conversation with our treasurer, Sharon, as I remember, we didn't get that for 2 years because they didn't fund it.
We get it 2017 and 2018, but they have not approved it for 2019 and forward yet.
Okay, real good. Kim, anything else to add here?
No, the league just asked that cities pass this and it gets to the state leaders before May 20th.
And just to read this for the people present and those watching us at home, I'm going to read probably the crux of this matter. Whereas existing funding mechanisms such as municipal state aid, property taxes, and special assessments have limited application, leaving cities under-equipped to address growing needs, cities need greater resources, including an additional dedicated state funding source for transportation and flexible policies to meet growing demands for street improvements and maintenance. We are one of 700 small cities that do not receive any gas taxes back. Every time you go and fill that tank up, you are paying upwards of 52 cents in taxes for each and every gallon. We get nothing. That's why this is so important, and that's why it's important that we hold our legislatures' feet to the fire so that we get our taxes back. Mr. Carr.
Well, you know, and I'm all for passing something that says we need more money because we're all paying gas tax here and we don't get any. But, you know, when I read some of this, you know, where it says on like the third paragraph to the end, this council requests this Minnesota legislature pass Governor Tim Walz sign a comprehensive and balanced transportation funding package that permanently increases dedicating funding for transportation. Okay, that seems like a tax increase. So my only thing is that we're not passing this resolution thinking that the city should be performing a tax increase, and we're supporting that. That's my only question. So if that's not what this says, then fine. But if that's what this says, then I guess I have an issue with it. I don't remember ever seeing that before.
Mr. Gifford.
I don't see tax in there. To me, it says nothing about increasing taxes, just saying that of the funding that we do have, we want to increase dedicated funding for transportation. So budget-wise, make sure that they include budgeting for this. To me, it doesn't read anything about increasing taxes. So that's my interpretation.
And at the state level, keep in mind, what we're doing here with this document is we are lobbying our state legislature to start giving us our money back. We're being taxed with no representation, is what's happening here. They're taking our money and handing it to cities that have over 5,000 population, and it's not fair. It's fundamentally unfair, and it should be changed. And that's what dedicated funding means. Give us our money back, we're paying it. So, I will, with that said, a little impassioned because I'm tired of watching that money go other places. I really am. We have to have these hard road discussions because we don't get that $250,000. If we had that $250,000, we wouldn't be having these discussions. I would entertain a motion to pass Resolution 2019-08.
I would move to approve this.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Very good. Denny and John, all those in favor of 2019-08 resolution, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you, gentlemen. Looks like we have a late entry into the liquor license category. Consideration of resolution 2019-09, Stillwater Oaks 2019 liquor license. Kim?
Mr. Mayor and council members, typically this would be on your December agenda when all the liquor licenses come through for the year. This business chose to wait as they are seasonal, and there are some fees involved. So it has been, they submitted their renewal. It has gone to the sheriff's department for the background check. They are ready to go if you approve.
Very good. So the background check has been approved. Sheriff is ready to go, and we've received our fees, correct?
The approval is based on all those things.
Contingent upon those
Yes.
things.
Yep.
Okay, very good. I'll take we'll entertain a motion to approve this contingent upon those things. 2019-09, resolution to approve on sale Sunday liquor license for Stillwater Oaks.
I'll move to pass this.
Do I have a second? Second. Very good. Giefer? John and Giefer. Very good. All those in favor of passing said resolution, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Gentlemen. Consideration of resolution 2019-10, the authorization for summary publication of the ordinance we spoke of on small cell. It's so long, we're going to bring it down and save ourselves some money by producing a summary publication. 2019-59. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor,
sorry.
council members, excuse me. I am going to request one revision on the actual ordinance summary.
Oh, okay.
The second sentence at the end, it says, manage users and establish design aesthetic standards. We're going to insert 4 small wireless facilities within the city's right-of-way in the city of Greenup. Just be specific that these are aesthetics for the small wireless facilities.
Where's that going, Kim?
Yeah, could you say that again? Give this a...
Yep, the second sentence right at the end. To manage users and establish design aesthetic standards.
What second sentence?
Yeah, I'm not sure where that is. on
The backside, but your actual ordinance summary, what is published.
Thank you.
I got you.
We're on the wrong page.
Thank you.
We're slow. Small.
So after aesthetic standards, we are going to insert for small wireless facilities.
Or small cell, whatever.
For small wireless facilities.
Within the city's rights of way in the city of Grant, Minnesota. So I would look for a motion to approve as revised.
I will move to approve resolution 2019-10
And I'll second.
with the amendment.
With the revision and amendment, and I'll second. All those in favor of approving 2019-10 with the revisions, please signify by saying aye. Aye. There we go. Nice job. No unfinished business, discussion items, staff updates. I'll look at the table first. Jennifer, you're having a good time up there. Do you have any staff updates?
I'm good.
Nothing. How about you, Brad? You look very updatey.
Nothing for me either.
Nothing. Kim, Ms. Points, do you want to talk about cleanup day or anything else?
And all the newsletters went out this week.
Okay.
People, they should be hitting mailboxes. I guess it started today, through the rest of the week, which does advertise the city's annual cleanup day. Staff did conduct the annual CUP review, so you'll be getting the results of that shortly.
Great.
After some site visits are done, but everything went well.
Good.
Audit process began last week with Sharon's help, and will continue this week. So
Excellent.
that's all I have.
Very good. I just have one. Yep, I'll get down there in just a
We're having a
second.
workshop?
I'm sorry.
We have.
I'm not sure yet.
Oh, we're not sure. Okay.
Yeah. The mayor will be at cleanup day. I'm gonna cook hot dogs. I won't run out this time. I promise. I ran out last time. It was very traumatic for a lot of the residents. So it won't happen again, I promise. Dave, do you have anything for us?
Nothing, thank you.
Nothing. City council reports. Anybody want to talk about a future agenda item they would like to speak of? John, we'll start with you. Anything?
No.
You're good? Okay. John, anything, or Jeff, anything in your car you want to talk about next month?
Pass.
Pass? Hard pass. I'm going to take a pass as well. Denny?
Not for me, thank you, sir.
All right. And Mr. Carr?
Anything we can do to liven these meetings up? They're pretty boring now.
Yeah, I know. That's what I heard that the other day. Someone called me and said, I don't watch them. They're boring. Really? Come on.
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, would you do us a favor and read the community calendar, please?
You know, that's my passion.
Yeah,
But-
I'm gonna pass I'm gonna pass this talking stick.
And notice my passion, I would like to be generous and offer John the opportunity to read the community
Well, I
calendar.
would certainly
Please do
love
so,
to.
Mr. Rogg.
Would love to read the
Yes.
community calendar,
I think
April
I'm gonna
3rd through April 30th. I think this is my first time. Matamidi Public Schools Board Meeting Thursday, April 11th and 25th, Matamidi District Education Center, 7 p.m. Stillwater Public Schools Board Meeting Thursday, April 11th, Stillwater City Hall at 7 p.m. And the Washington County Commissioners Meeting Tuesdays at the Government Center at 9 a.m.
Mr. Rogg, that was an absolutely tremendous
done.
reading of the community calendar.
I read a lot of kids' books to my children, so I
Very, very well
Touching.
done.
It was a thing of beauty, Mr. Rogg. Our meeting is now officially not boring, although I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would so move to adjourn this meeting.
Thank you very much. Second. And all those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned. I thought for sure the audio